Started. Okay. All right. We are recording.
Awesome. Thanks, Dawn. As we just mentioned, for anyone who recently joined us,
At the specialty clinic on a monthly basis starting January 8th. He specializes in treating disorders.
Just a friendly reminder to mute yourself. There we go. Upon joining. Last week was National Falls Prevention Awareness Week and National Falls Prevention Awareness Day. So if you did anything exciting to celebrate National Falls Prevention Awareness Week, feel free to drop it in the chat. Our team, Capture Falls team, we made and sent out an e-card. That's what we did to celebrate National Falls Prevention Awareness Week with the Capture Falls hospitals. So welcome to, this is session 5 of our NHA and Capture Falls H-Crick virtual learning cohort. So it's amazing how quickly we've worked through our cohort. So what we'll do today, I'll go back a slide. We want to spend the first half of our time together today to review your auditing experience. And then we'll share with you kind of an example that you can use and some tools you can use to create a PDSA from your auditing results to help you move forward. And then if we have time, Dawn has some education for you on post-fall clinical assessment. If not, we may push that off until session 6, I think, depending on how things go today. Dana, do you have anything you want to make sure to share with the group before we get started?
The only quick thing is, well, thank you all for joining us again, as always. We did get all of the recordings and the slides on the NHA website. So if you missed one, if you want some of your staff to see something, want the handouts, those kind of things, those are all available. If you have trouble finding them, let me know. I can send you the direct link, but it's under quality, and then there's H-Quick grant on the NHA website, and all of the recordings and slides are there, and once these next few are over, we'll add those to it. But just so everyone knows, you can get to all of that stuff now. So I think that's all I have.
That sounds great. Thanks, Dana. And just a friendly reminder to make sure to add your team to the chat so we can keep track of that for attendance purposes. As you mentioned at the beginning, we are on session 5 today, so we'll be focusing on reviewing your auditing experience. We'll talk about using the model for improvement to create a small improvement project to build upon what you learned from your auditing results. And then, as I mentioned, if you have time, we'll do some topic-specific education on post-fall clinical assessment. So we want to start with a focus on learning from you and giving you an opportunity to share with us and with everyone your auditing process and experience. So as a quick recap, you may recall that from the gap analysis that we had everyone in the cohort complete, auditing fall risk reduction practices emerged as the top area or opportunity for improvement. So we provided some education on how to create an auditing kind of program and process, and asked you to utilize that to conduct an audit of something fall risk reduction related of your choice to help get you started on moving forward with that auditing fall risk reduction practices program. So to support some engagement today, we have several polling questions that we would like to pose for the group so we can learn about your auditing process and experience. And then some of the last questions we'll place in the chat and allow you to dialogue through chat or unmute yourself and share your experience as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dawn, who is going to be our Zoom poll master today.
Yes, so we tested this yesterday, so hopefully it works just as well.
Yes, hopefully it works. It worked yesterday.
as it did yesterday. And I should also say we set these up to be anonymous, and so there is no shame in any of your answers for any of these of these questions. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start. I'll launch the first question, which is just simply, were you able to find time to get an audit done in the last few weeks? So I'll go ahead and launch that. You should see that on your screen, hopefully. We'll give everybody a chance to answer, and then I will share the results. All right, looks like we have a few more people that could answer, but the answering has tapered off. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share those results with everybody.
Great. So we have, oh, go ahead, Dawn.
You're saying it correctly. Correct?
Yeah, I can see the results.
It's working.
Yay. So were you able to complete an audit in the last few weeks? We have just over 50% who said yes. 33% were not able to complete an audit in the last few weeks, and 17% were unsure. So we'll go on to our next question, which is related to what areas of your fall risk reduction program did you audit?
Yeah, and so, obviously these questions will be, geared to the people that were able to get an audit done. But I would say, like, even if, this is not a scientific poll, so even if you were to answer like what you are intending to audit, if you just haven't gotten it done yet, you could go ahead and answer that way. And this is a multiple answer question, so you can choose more than one option for this one, because there's multiple things that you can audit, and the options that I typed in are not certainly all inclusive. There are other things that you might be interested in auditing, but these seem to be kind of many of the more common ones that people would audit. So I only can put in 10 answer options in the Zoom poll, so I was limited. All right, answers are still coming in, so I'll give you guys a little bit more time.
And if you audited something different, you can select other. We don't have a way to capture like an open-ended comment about what that other topic was. So if you really want to share what you audited and it was other, you're welcome to put it in the chat as well.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end it because it looks like answers have tapered off. And share.
Great. So we had quite a variety of fall risk reduction practices that were audited, which is great. It looks like the most frequent item that was included in the audit most frequently was if gate belts were available in the room. Several others also included completion of the fall risk assessment tool, if alarms were in use as intended, different environmental safety considerations. And then about just under half included things like equipment safety and function, gate belts in use during mobility, and documentation of fall events completed. And then we also have some who included more visual identifiers of fall risk, so things like signage, bracelets, information on the whiteboard, things like that. Just about a fifth did patient and family education to see if that was completed for fall risk reduction. And then about 14% included something other than what we have on the list as well. So we covered a really nice variety of topics in the auditing process, which is great to see.
And I think, if you were able to join us, couple sessions ago when we talked about auditing in general, you know, by no means do you have to audit all of these things all of the time. You know, you're going to choose what to audit based on things like, you know, maybe you've just rolled out a new initiative for something, and you know, like some aspect of your fall risk reduction program, and you really want to see how well that's stuck. So like, let's say for instance, your PTs and OTs just engaged in some staff education to reinforce gait belt use and safely assist patients with mobility. Well, you know, it would then make sense to maybe after you go through that education process to go ahead and audit. Maybe you've audited that before and that's where you identified you needed that education. And then, you know, that would be a prime target for another audit down the road to see how well that worked. And if it really is getting kind of ingrained in the culture. So yeah, so the variety, I think, maybe just reflects on the fact that, you know, you're focusing on different things in your program. So don't feel like you have to audit all of these things every single time. It's kind of dependent upon what's going on in your fall program at that moment. So do the people that chose other, you guys want to share in the chat or unmute and share what you audited? You can go ahead and do that if you would like to, as we'll maybe go ahead and move on to the next question. So, oh, there it is. All right.
There's a couple coming in. So care plan updates was something that was audited. Any recent medications given prior to the fall or medication changes was another item included in an audit as well.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and go on to question 3.
Question 3 is who did or who conducted the audit? Multiple choice here as well, as there may have been multiple people involved in conducting the audit. And certainly, again, you can select the other option if the ideas we generated aren't listed in the poll, and feel free to include those in the chat if you'd like.
I'm going to go ahead and end it because it looks like answers have tailed off, and share.
All right, so overwhelmingly, quality improvement coordinator engaged in the auditing process, which absolutely makes sense. Just about a quarter included a staff nurse, about 27% included others. So if you have others that you'd love to share, feel free to put that in the chat. And then we see a little bit of engagement from risk management, rehab therapy, so PT and or OT, and pharmacy as well. I see in the chat, one facility mentioned they've had CNAs perform a lot of the audits for the patient rooms as they're in the rooms with the patients a lot, which makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Should we move on, Vicki?
Yep, we can move on to the
Okay.
next.
All right.
Question 4 is, which patients did you include in your audit?
We also acknowledge with this question, if you're from a critical access hospital, your hospital is probably your unit.
Right,
So
right.
we have a variety of hospital sizes of hospitals in this group. So the small rural hospitals can consider themselves a unit, perhaps. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end it. And share.
All right, so we have a pretty nice split here. A majority of respondents said all patients on a unit who were at risk. Some looked at all patients on a unit regardless of risk, and others looked at a sample of patients on a unit also regardless of fall risk.
And I would say that, for the ones that chose were those, patients regardless at risk, either all of them on a unit or a sample on a unit, there are universal fall risk reduction interventions that we should be using. And so that, if you're really focused in on the delivery of those universal interventions, that would make good sense to do all patients regardless if they've been identified at risk or not. But if you're trying to audit something that is very specific to patients at risk, so say, bed alarm use, for example, though that's certainly only going to be related to patients at risk, and it might not even be related to all patients at risk, just those who have indicators that an alarm might be needed. So, your choice of who to audit is going to be dependent somewhat upon what it is you're trying to audit for fall risk reduction. So there's not necessarily right answers for any of these. It's kind of just a sense to, give everybody a sense of what everybody is doing. I'm going to move on to question 5.
Yeah, question 5. We have 2 more polling questions, and then we'll open it up for more of a chat dialogue and discussion. So question 5 is how, since we focused on tips for the auditing process when we delivered our education, this question is about how did you collect your audit data? This one's also multiple choice, so you're able to select multiple options if you use multiple means or methods to collect your data.
I'm going to go ahead and end it.
All right, so quite a bit of variety here too, which is great. So we have 69% looked at the medical record to collect audit data. 62% also used a checklist, which was a practice that we promoted when we did our education on auditing fall risk reduction practices. We had just about a third also did some direct observations of patient, staff, or environment, which is great because I can give you a lot of real-time information about what's happening in practice. About 30% engaged staff in conversation to help collect audit data, and 15% had conversation with patients as well, which is fantastic to see some patient engagement. And then 8% had some other means to help collect audit data.
And I would say, with this one, again, it kind of depends what's appropriate, depends on what's being audited, of course. So all of these are viable options. Okay, last polling question.
Yeah, last polling question is kind of the wrap up or post audit process. So how did you, or how will you, if you have yet to share the results of your audit, how did you share the results of your audit? This is also a multiple choice option here, because there are many different ways you might deliver your results or provide feedback to individual staff, right, groups of staff, or teams on a unit or in a department. So you are welcome to select multiple options for this poll as well. All right, so again, a nice variety and different ways of providing feedback on audit results, which is great to see. So overwhelming majority included some sort of verbal feedback with all relevant staff. So maybe that was in a department meeting or a staff meeting. to deliver feedback on their results. Just over half also included some written communication too, which from the literature, they recommend, kind of a best practice is finding a healthy mix between verbal and written feedback on the auditing results. About 25% had some conversations with specific staff members. That's a great strategy, especially if you identify some maybe challenging problem areas where we don't want to call someone out in a broader staff meeting, but rather can deliver that feedback in a one-on-one setting and have a constructive conversation about areas for improvement. And then a small percentage also did some in writing feedback with specific staff members as well. So that concludes our polling questions for today, because those are the items that are a little bit easier to capture and to learn from everyone in a poll. The other questions we would like to address and kind of open up for either chat, dialogue, or conversation if you'd like to unmute and share. This is just to give you a chance to share with us things about the process. So we'd like to start with the question of what went well with your audit process or experience. And again, you're welcome to place your thoughts in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute and speak up and share with the group. We'd love to hear what went well with your auditing process and experience. All right, I see in the chat, Jamie mentioned found opportunities for improvement, which is great. That's one of the goals of auditing, is to not only see what's working well, but also areas where we can improve. So that's great. Linda mentioned she'd like to add a direct observation section to the medical record audit. So as a result of the auditing process, finding something else you'd like to add or adjust in the auditing program. That's great. Would anyone like to share live with us? Like, you're welcome to unmute if you'd like to share with us things that went well with your audit process. I see in the chat, Renee said that they'll be putting a sticker on the computer monitors to remind the staff of hourly rounding, and placing high-risk stars outside of the patient room. They're also changing where the high-risk stars are located so they don't get forgotten. All right, we'll transition to the next question, sort of the flip side. Maybe what didn't go well with your audit process, or things that were unanticipated that you ran into as you implemented your audit. So we'll give everyone a chance to put their thoughts in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute and share share with us something that didn't go well, and we'd be happy to hear your experience.
Hopefully this means that the process of actually conducting the audits was fairly benign and easy.
Well, we'll hope that that's the case. And if not, that's completely normal. And you can, keep that in mind as once we finish these questions, as we talk about the model for improvement, we can always apply that model for improvement in the PDSA cycle to improve our auditing processes, in addition to practices that are happening at the bedside. What will you do differently with your audit process next time is the next question. I think Linda's comment from earlier would fit in here as well, as she mentioned wanting to add a direct observation section to the medical record audit. So that'd be something that could be done differently the next time.
Or maybe you've identified like maybe it needs to be done by a different person or a different set of patients. Or maybe
Or
everything
nothing,
went well,
yeah.
which is great.
If everything went well, that's great too. Then there's really nothing to change.
Whenever my students in class don't have any questions, I just tell myself, I'm like, it's because I taught it so well. So maybe we taught everybody so well about how to do audits. Jamie found something to add to her audit checklist. So
There we go.
Yeah.
I had a colleague as we wait to transition to the next question, I had a colleague in graduate school who was teaching some undergraduate psychology, I think freshman students, who waited an entire 7 minutes in a room for someone to respond. But we don't have time for that today, and we're not going to do that. We're all adults here. So we'll know that you're using these questions for your own reflection and move forward. The last question, I mean, all these are important reflection questions to think about your auditing process and experience. But the last question we really want you to spend some time thinking about, because that will feed into kind of your next assignment prior to session 6, which is conducting a PDSA cycle for improvement in something related to fall risk reduction. And this question is, what changes for your fall risk reduction program, if any, are you considering making based on your audit? And I think the information that Renee shared earlier is a good example of that. So putting stickers on computer monitors, changing the location of where high risk stars are located so that we don't actually forget to put them on the doors, and then actually placing them on the doors outside of the patient room. Those are great examples of small practice changes that could be tested out for improvement at the bedside. But we're interested to see what what changes you are thinking about or are intending based on what you've learned from the audit you conducted. Harriet Lindem's mentioned that upon review of their care plans, they're finding that some individualization is needed. And so they need to re-educate staff on fall risk reduction interventions, which is great. We need to educate on interventions and how those interventions to specific and unique patient risk factors to help with that individualization of the care plan. But for the sake of time, I think we'll continue forward, in order to make sure we get through the rest of our education for today. But you can continue to dialogue in the chat if you would like. But really keep in mind as we move forward and talk about the model for improvement, changes that you would like to make to your program, whether that's something you learned from your auditing results, or if you have other changes you would like to address based on what you learned from your own gap analysis that you conducted with us last month. So you may recall throughout our sessions, we've been briefly referencing the model for improvement by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement as a framework for rapid cycle quality improvement initiatives and practices. So the way we have this framed here is to use the results of your audit to help identify an area for improvement. Or as you mentioned, anything you identified from your gap analysis that you'd like to focus on for a small rapid cycle improvement project is appropriate as well. What we want to do today is to briefly walk you through the model for improvement and a PDSA cycle. And we created an example of a kind of a fall risk reduction specific topic you might learn that you might identify through an audit, which is patient and family education and patient understanding of fall risk and risk factors. So we'll follow that example along as we include some of this didactic content about the model for improvement. Essentially, what are we trying to accomplish? What is our goal and what do we want to improve? And this particular step typically ends with some sort of aim statement, which is a clear summary statement of what your team hopes to achieve in some sort of measurable way over a specific amount of time, also including some sort of target goal that you would like to address or achieve. So the aim statement really helps to set up your work, to guide it, and it establishes what success might look like for you. So to give you an example, let's say through your auditing process, your audit results indicated that only 50% of your patients, or let's say family members, if the patient has a condition that precludes their understanding of the education, were only able to articulate that they were at risk for falls, and only 50% of them could share with us at least 3 interventions that were in place to help them reduce their risk of falling. I'd say that that's something you are standing or their fall risk. Yeah.
We lost you there for a few minutes, for like a minute or so.
Yeah, my internet connection is a little bit unstable. Let me try moving to a different spot in my office.
It got better when you were when you stopped your video, but we lost you for maybe a sentence or two. Sorry to.
No, thank you. I would rather you let me know than not let me know. Is it a little bit better?
It seems okay, yeah.
Okay. Where did I start to break up, and I can go back?
It was just a sentence or two, so not very far.
Okay.
You were just explaining the example aim statement.
Okay. So setting up an aim or a specific example or a specific aim statement can really be useful to help guide your improvement efforts moving forward. So if we follow along with our example of trying to improve the outcomes of patient and family education, you might set up an aim statement that says something like, our goal is to improve patient understanding of their fall risk status and fall risk interventions from, let's say 50%, that maybe that's the percent that you identified from your audit process. And your goal is to improve that up to 75% in the next month for patients who are at risk for falls in your specific unit. We'll send along a resource to you after our session today by the IHI. It's an aim statement worksheet that you can utilize to help you craft a specific aim statement for the change area that you want to focus on for your rapid cycle improvement project. Once we've defined our aim, the next area or the next question is, how will we know that a change is an improvement? And this is where we can focus on defining the specific things that we want to measure. So we recognize that when you're doing a rapid cycle improvement project on a topic such as falls, it can be really difficult to see movement in the specific outcome, like fall incidences and fall rates in such a short period of time. So we would encourage you to think about focusing on some sort of process measure, which really represents, the parts of the steps in our system. Are these working as planned? So if we think about our patient family education example, perhaps you might look at a process measure like the percent of staff who are conducting a teach back with a patient or a family during fall risk reduction education to help us achieve our ultimate aim of greater patient understanding of their fall risk and the interventions that are used. You might also look at something like the percent of patients and family members who are participating in that teach back process during their education as well. Over time, you may see movement in that outcome measure of perhaps the frequency or the rate of assisted falls or unassisted falls, but you're unlikely to move the needle on that too much in such a short time frame.
I'd also mention that most of the things that are on this list, those audit checklists, are largely process measures. So that's a great way to measure that stuff.
Yep. Then we want to move forward and select our changes. So we know what our goal is, what we're trying to accomplish. We've established some sort of process metrics to help us know if the change is moving the needle or making some sort of improvement. Now we need to identify what is the change, or what are the changes that we can make that will result in improvement. One important thing to keep in mind when you're picking changes is that the statement that all improvement requires change, but not every change is actually going to be an improvement. Sometimes even changes with the best intentions make things a little bit worse, which is part of the learning process. But we don't just change for the sake of change. We need really well thought through changes that we'd like to implement to help us achieve our goals. So some example change ideas for our patient family education for fall risk reduction topic might be things like conducting education with staff and giving them an opportunity to practice delivering patient family education so that we know that they are able to explain fall risk and fall risk reduction interventions to patients, and that they feel comfortable and confident doing so. We might also encourage staff to conduct a teach back with patient and family members so that staff can have that productive dialogue and ensure that the patient and the family really understand the patient's fall risk and the interventions that they're using to reduce fall risk. That's the change concept we decided to select for the rest of our example moving forward. Then you're ready for your PDSI cycle, so your plan, do, study, act cycle, which can be used to test out the change in a real work setting. So we plan out our change, we try it out, we observe the results, and we act on what we learned for further improvement. So again, we have a resource we can share with you on the PDSA process as well. It's a PDSA worksheet from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement that we will send along. And it has some spaces in an example you can follow to really map out what your plan, do, study, act cycle will look like as you look to make a change to improve fall risk reduction practices. So for our example plan, let's say hypothetically we said, we'll have nursing staff conduct the teach back with the patient and the family during fall risk reduction education for every patient that's determined to be at risk for falls per our fall risk assessment, and also able to engage in that education as well. And we want to do it over a 2-week time period, let's say. So some of the questions we might have or want to be able to answer during this test of change is, do the staff find that the time it takes to conduct a teach back is really worthwhile? And are patients actually understanding why they're at risk for falls and the purpose of the interventions? So in our plan moving forward, we will identify the data that we want to collect. So perhaps we'll ask staff to document completing a teach back on the chart. We can audit that completion of the documentation and the results of the teach back from the chart. We may also ask staff for feedback or a random sample of patients about their knowledge of their fall risk and interventions. Then we do the study. So we spend a lot of time thinking about the goals, the metrics, the change, the plan. We go ahead and implement our study, and we do the test on a small scale. So within our example, let's say we ran our teach back test for 2 weeks, and we found that there were 12 newly admitted patients identified at risk for falls per the fall risk assessment during that time frame. 2 patients weren't able to participate due to significant cognitive impairment and lack of family presence. So that takes our sample down to 10. We attempted a teach back with 8 of the 10 remaining patients. 1 didn't receive a teach back, 1 didn't receive education altogether. And early on, we documented an issue with staff saying that there were some challenges with documenting results of the teach back in the EMR in a standard place. So we're already starting to identify some areas where we can make improvement in the next step of our process. Then we study the results. So we analyze the results that we got to help us identify some areas for improvement moving forward. So here's some, this is all just hypothetical data from our patient family education example. But let's say what we learned was that 8 of 10 staff members attempted to do a teach back with their patients. So we hit a goal of 80% of staff doing so. Then the 2 cases where it didn't happen, staff reported some competing demands where there was either no education or no opportunity to deliver a teach back. Staff felt like the teach back process took about 5 to 10 minutes, but that varied by patient. 5 of the patients fully understood their risk and their interventions, so about 63%, which wasn't quite at the goal of 75%, but it was certainly better than the initial percent of 50%. And staff reported that these patients actually utilized their call aids and waited for staff help to ambulate. So they felt like the education that they provided through the teach back process was worth it. But we also identified some challenges. Let's say 2 patients didn't understand why they needed to ask for help before getting up. 1 didn't understand why they were at risk for falls. And 1 patient didn't like being quizzed about the interventions and refused to engage in the conversation. And then we wrap up with the ACT step, which is to essentially, based on what you learned from the test, you make a plan for your next step. So in this example, I think the team would take steps to make some adaptations. So consider some modifications and prepare to run another test of their teach back process in an effort to reach their goal of improving patient understanding of their fall risk and some of the interventions that are being used to keep them safe from falling. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dawn for the wrap up of our session today.
Okay, so I'm sitting here debating if I should even, if we should just wrap things up now and save the, because we've got like 14 minutes left, which is maybe not quite enough to even do the post-fall clinical assessment justice. So I guess, I don't know, Dana, what do you think? I'm kind of inclined to maybe leave it at this and just save that topic for another day.
I think so, as tight as, I mean, I hate to get started on something and not be able to give it its full time. So I think that's good.
Okay, we'll save it for next time. And the reason that that topic is even on the docket is because that is one of the things that was identified. That and post-fall huddles were the things that people kind of identified as gaps in the gap analysis that you guys did way at the beginning. So, okay, actually, before we wrap it up, Amber asked a question in the chat about whether or not anybody implemented an electronic audit tool or did they use a paper tool? And so we don't have that as a polling question. So maybe if somebody wants to just unmute and share their experience, or if they want to put it in the chat, that would be fine.
This is Stephanie from Thayer County Health Services. We have a system called Action Queue, and we had already kind of started working on doing a audit. So consequently, we just went ahead and used the Action Queue audit to do on this as well. And it worked really well for us because we were able to put in several different areas to audit at one time. And then we added in the observation as well.
Great. Yeah, I mean, certainly the checklists that we gave you are pretty rudimentary paper Word document types of things. Not to say that the questions couldn't be, you know, potentially built into an electronic system, but there's one message in the chat said a paper audit tool was used. So anybody else want to share their experiences or pros and cons of any of them? Okay. Any comments about the PDSI cycle? We thought that it might be helpful to give you like a hypothetical example of something tangible about your fall risk reduction program rather than just talking about it kind of in abstract. So hopefully that is an example. And again, like you could potentially plug in anything that you uncovered in your audit or anything else that you potentially feel like you need to work on. You know, and again, I think Vicky's comments about process measures are well taken, especially if we're kind of considering this a 3-month cycle, rapid cycle improvement process. You know, there's again not a lot of time to move the needle on those fall outcomes, those fall rates, especially if you are a smaller hospital, and you know, just because you just don't have the volume that larger hospitals do. And so that way, looking for some movement in those process measures and using those as your outcomes is good, and it still is evidence of making an improvement. So, okay. All right, so we don't meet again for another month because the idea is when we kind of planned this out with Dana was that we wanted you to kind of have time to go back, you know, and try to implement this yourself. And so we will be sending out those resources that Vicki mentioned, the worksheets that Vicki mentioned. We'll send those out sometime later today or early tomorrow morning. And you can use those resources. And again, hopefully the example has generated some thoughts for you about how to implement a PDSA cycle about something related to fall risk reduction. And again, make it specific to you, your facility, whatever you need to work on. And the idea is that, you know, over the next month that you would have time to implement that PDSA cycle. And then what we hope to do is bring everybody back and have some dialogue again. Don't know yet if it'll be polling questions or open-ended. We'll kind of play it by ear and make that decision as we get closer to it. But the idea is some time spent kind of sharing the experience and whether or not There are things about just the PDSA cycle that maybe need to be improved. And then otherwise topic specific education again, which we will most likely plan on that post-fall clinical assessment. You already have a handout. I'll send it out again though when the time comes. And then we have one more session after this one, I think in late November. And so I know post-fall huddle was another topic of interest. And so we will connect with Dana and make sure that you guys are aware of what the agenda is for those last two sessions. So that way we are meeting the needs of the majority of the group. Okay. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, need some information, feel free to reach out to Dana or any of us here at UNMC. And that's just our standard acknowledgement funding slides. So with that, unless anybody has any questions that they want to raise to the group, we'll go ahead and get off a few minutes early today.
Thank you guys so much.
We can stay on a little bit in case anybody wants to bring anything up, but otherwise enjoy the rest of your day and we'll touch base again in about a month.
Thank you.